You've heard me talk about ghosts, you've heard me talk about history, and now there is a new topic we are adding to Morbid Michigan's catalog. And that topic is cryptozoology. I apologize for the hiatus since the last video. I've been working on like 6 different things at once. There's going to be a lot of really cool stuff coming up. And this particular one I had to research very heavily because there is a lot of history behind it. So without any further ado, we're going to begin. The Nain Rouge. Now, if you're from Detroit, you may have already heard of it. You may have enjoyed a craft beer by the name. Maybe you've been out to the parade. But if you haven't, I have a story for you. We'll start with Antoine Cadillac, the man most people consider the founder of Detroit. Now, a little bit of background about him. He was a French explorer. He came over from France, but there's really no record of his immigration, so people think that he may have done it illegally. But he's considered the founder of what he called Fort Pontchartrain du Détroit. I don't really speak French, and there's probably going to be a lot of words that I mispronounce. So if you know the correct pronunciation, please let me know. So when Antoine came to America, he kind of forged himself a new identity. But one thing about Antoine is he ticked off a lot of people. He ended up getting into trouble for trafficking furs and alcohol and for abuse of authority. But the thing is, in the early days of Detroit, there was a huge fire, so a lot of records were destroyed. So we don't know what we don't know, the extent of that. But long story short, he skedaddled out of Detroit and found himself a new home. He ended up bringing more French people in to colonize Louisiana. He also directed copper mining in Missouri, which was done by slaves. But he ended up getting kicked out of that job too, and was also kicked out of official office. He moved back to France, he ended up doing some time in prison, and eventually he died at the age of 72. He's thought to have had like 13 kids. One recurring theme that just kept going throughout his life, whenever he thought he had a good thing going, things would go south for Antoine. He'd end up getting caught up in what illegal things he was doing, or some sort of disaster would happen. And that is where fact begins to turn into fable. Apparently, in 1701, a fortune teller warned Antoine that he needed to appease the Nain Rouge. Now, he didn't take this very seriously, and I don't think he thought of it again for the next 6 years until he and his wife were heading home from a May Day celebration in Detroit, and he was walking home, and a certain little guy crossed his path. That is the Nain Rouge. He stands at about 2.5 feet tall, and his description differs by account, but he is generally considered to be reddish in color, hence the name. But Antoine's wife, Marie-Therese Cadillac, she starts freaking out. But Antoine, being the man that he was, did not heed the fortune teller's warning. He bonks the little man, bonk, like that, with his cane, and he says, "Get out of my way, you red imp." Whatever he said, it was like that in French. And the Nain Rouge is said to have disappeared off into the mist, cackling madly. And Marie starts freaking out. She's like, "Misfortune will soon be our portion." And that is exactly what happened. They had a large portion of misfortune. A big, all-you-can-eat buffet size misfortune, as I've mentioned before, where Antoine gets caught up in his crimes and all this stuff happens. When Antoine died, he had lost most of his fortune. He really didn't have hardly anything to leave to his kids, the few kids that survived. And back then, it wasn't too uncommon for people to die at a very young age, but he had 13 kids, and by the time his wife died in 1746, he had 3 kids left, which is very unfortunate. As for the city that Antoine founded, it has certainly had its share of misfortune over the years. On July 30th, 1763, the Nain Rouge was spotted running along the Detroit River. And the next day was the Battle of Bloody Run. That is where 250 British soldiers tried to storm the camp that belonged to Pontiac, who was the chief of the Odawa tribe. And let's just say, it didn't go good for them. The reason why the British soldiers were set up there was because by that time the British had taken over, French had released its control of the fort. So yeah, the Battle of Bloody Run, not good. Lots of people died. And a lot of people think that the Nain Rouge caused the damage or was maybe warning people of the damage. The Nain Rouge was present for the Great Fire of 1805. He was spotted just before the fire broke out. He was seen running around, doing cartwheels, cackling like a madman, and just being the little devil that he is. Despite his heavy presence in the city, the Nain Rouge, also known as the Demon of the Strait, some folklorists think he might not have been born in Detroit. There's a similar red devil in some legends and stories from France and from Quebec, known as the Lutin. But the thing is, the Lutin is associated with mischief, not so much disaster. One historian and folklorist, Charles Skinner, theorizes that the Nain Rouge originated elsewhere. He calls the Nain Rouge the impish offspring of the stone god, which is a Native American god. But others theorize that the Nain Rouge comes from the snake goddess of Belle Isle. And now they say the snake goddess of Belle Isle created the Nain Rouge in order to keep white settlers away, which kind of makes sense because he's often seen at sites where Native Americans won some sort of a battle. In a video from Wayne State's Ethnic Layers of Detroit series, they say 18th century sources consistently noticed the Nain Rouge at sites where Native Americans were the victors over white settlers. During the War of 1812, the United States and its indigenous allies were fighting against the United Kingdom and its indigenous allies that had made over here. The war ultimately ended in a draw, but General William Hull reported a, quote, dwarf attack right before he surrendered the city of Detroit. There was also a woman in 1884 who said she was attacked by a baboon with a horned head, brilliant, restless eyes, and a devilish leer on its face. Now that sounds an awful lot like our guy. Sightings in the early 1900s were a little bit more rare from what I could find. Now, if I'm missing any sightings or I have any historical details that are incorrect, please feel free to correct me in the comments so that we have all of our facts straight. Some say they saw the Nain Rouge before the July 1967 riots, also known as the 12th Street riots. And some even say they saw him wandering the streets while it was all going down. Now, during these 5-day-long riots, 43 people died. Despite the bad rap he gets as the harbinger of doom, some say the Nain is more than just an evil imp. In fact, he has his own fan club and supporters. They call him a misunderstood hero. Now here's a clip from a documentary uploaded by the legendary paranormal researcher and cryptozoologist John Tenney. This documentary is from the year after those riots happened, 1968.
The Nain Rouge is an ancient nature spirit who protects the city and its suburbs. Here we see children following the example of the Nain Rouge by picking up litter around the neighborhood. Good work, kids.
The website nainrouge.weirdlectures.com, I'm assuming is run by John Tenney, but I'm not entirely sure. It says, quote, "The beginnings of Detroit's Nain Rouge are thought to originate from the Algonquin creation myths, which concern Glooskap, who, after creating the earth and men, continued by forming beings, such as fairies and dwarfs. These nature spirits were to act as protectors of certain regions of the country, and to ensure that Glooskap's evil brother, Malsum, would cause no harm to man, man's community, or the natural environment. When European missionaries spread throughout Michigan, the tribal gods and supernatural creatures were turned into demons and evil spirits in an attempt to vanquish them from memory. Some historians and researchers have also made the case that the telling of tales of a red devil may in fact not be supernatural at all, but are even more problematic than understood at first glance. The original stories told may be cultural folk tales of the original inhabitants of North America, as described through the lens of European settlers. When seen in this light, we can understand just how horrible the idea of blaming problems on the red devil actually are." End quote. I wanted to make sure to include that passage completely in full so that we can understand a little better how this legend may have come to be. This could be an instance of colonization and its effects on culture. This could just be white settlers coming in and reinterpreting Native American myths and legends into something evil when it was really supposed to be a protector, and instead has been since reinterpreted into a harbinger of doom. And I think that is why so many people are saying to support the Nain Rouge and things like that, because they want people to learn its true history. Now, I'm not saying for sure that that's how this myth came to be. It could just be another myth brought over from the French, the lutin, or most likely of all, it's probably a mix of all of them. The lutin, the stone god's offspring, the creation of the snake goddess of Belle Isle. Personally, what I think from my research is I think it's a mix of all of them. But then flash forward to sightings in more recent times. 2 Detroit Edison workers saw what they thought was a small child climbing a telephone pole. He climbed all the way to the top, jumped down 20 feet, and then scurried away. This was 1976, the day after a huge ice storm hit Detroit. Could that have been the Nain Rouge? Who's to say? As recent as 1996, 2 men reported seeing the Nain Rouge running from the scene of a car burglary. And maybe he just needed a ride. Nowadays, there's that huge parade in Detroit every spring called Marche de la Nain Rouge, where tons of people come to try to chase the Nain out of the city. Now, the co-founder and parade director, Francis Grunau, calls it kind of a mashup of Halloween, Burning Man, and Mardi Gras. But there you can also find the Nain's supporters, people who say that the Nain Rouge has been protecting Detroit for hundreds, if not thousands of years, before it was even known as Detroit. Now come spring, hopefully I'll be able to make it out to the parade and see it all for myself. In the meantime, if you want to do more research for yourself on the Nain Rouge, here's where I got my info. Weird Michigan by Linda S. Godfrey is the book that first sparked my interest. I would highly recommend reading it. Ethnic Layers of Detroit, which is a project by Wayne State University. It provided a great resource and information online. The Detroit Historical Society's website, Michigan's Other Side, paranormalcatalog.net, and Myths and Legends of Our Own Land by Charles M. Skinner. I'll see you in the next one. Have a grave day. Do you like my signature skull that I have on this table here in every video so far? I like him a lot myself. And I also like real human skulls. Call me a weirdo, but I think it's kind of cool. Anatomy. You can see what caused someone's death, and just seeing what we look like on the inside is a pretty mind-boggling experience. Would you like to see a real human skull? Would you like to see me hold a real human skull and talk about how you can tell what happened to the person, how old they are, what their gender is? Well, you can do that. We have videos of me doing that very thing. So make sure to like and subscribe, share this video with all your friends. See, he's smiling because he can see you sharing the video right now. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.